In the high desert of northeastern Arizona, where the wind carries the scent of sage and the mesas rise like islands from a sea of red sand, there is a village that has never been abandoned. For more than 1,000 years, people have lived here, farming corn in soil that receives less than 10 inches of rain a year, building homes from stone and mud atop cliffs 300 feet high, and keeping a way of life that has outlasted empires. They call themselves Hopi, the peaceful people. The rest of the world knows them simply as the Hopi. This is not a story about the past. It is a story about a nation that still exists, whose ceremonies are still danced, whose language is still spoken, whose corn is still planted by hand in the same fields their ancestors chose centuries ago. Over the next hour, we will trace the origins, beliefs, struggles, and daily life of the Hopi people. From their migration stories and their ancient villages, to their farming techniques perfectly adapted to one of the harshest climates in North America, to the modern challenges they face today. This is the story of the Hopi, people of peace, keepers of the mesa, and one of the oldest continuously inhabited nations in North America. Origins and migration. Hopi history does not begin with a date on a calendar. It begins with a story, one passed from generation to generation, long before anyone wrote it down. According to Hopi tradition, the people emerged into the fourth world, after journeying up through 3 worlds below. Each of the earlier worlds had been destroyed because people forgot how to live in balance, with each other, with the earth, and with the spiritual forces that sustain life. Emerging into this new world, the Hopi made a covenant. They would act as caretakers of the land, and in return, they would be allowed to remain here. From that point of emergence, oral tradition describes a series of migrations. Different clans, groups tracing descent through a shared ancestor, traveled across the continent in different directions before eventually settling in the region we now call the Hopi Mesas. Some clan traditions describe journeys south into what is now Mexico and Central America. Others describe routes through the Grand Canyon region. Each clan carried its own story, its own ceremonies, and its own knowledge. And when the clans converged on the mesas, they wove these separate threads into a single shared Hopi identity. Archaeological evidence supports a long and gradual settlement of the region. Ancestral Puebloan communities, sometimes called Anasazi in older literature, though many contemporary Puebloan peoples prefer the term ancestral Puebloan, built increasingly complex villages across the Colorado Plateau beginning over 1,000 years ago. By around 1100 CE, communities on and near the Hopi Mesas were already permanent settlements. This was not a nomadic people passing through. This was the deliberate, patient construction of a homeland. What makes Hopi migration traditions remarkable is that they are not simply myths set in an unspecified past. They are treated as a living historical record, a map of obligations, land claims, and ceremonial responsibilities that continues to shape Hopi society today. When a Hopi person explains which clan they belong to, they are also explaining a piece of that migration story, where their ancestors came from, what knowledge they carried, and what role their clan plays in the ceremonial life of the village. The 3 mesas. Today, most Hopi villages are clustered on or near 3 mesas, simply named First Mesa, Second Mesa, and Third Mesa. These are not separate tribes, but distinct communities, each with its own villages, leadership, and ceremonial calendar, all part of one Hopi nation. On Third Mesa sits Old Oraibi, a village widely regarded as one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in the United States, with roots stretching back to at least the 12th century. To stand in Oraibi is to stand in a place where the same families have tended the same fields for over 800 years. First Mesa is known for its pottery tradition, home to villages where generations of women have shaped, painted, and fired clay, using techniques passed down through families rather than written instructions. Second Mesa is known for its coiled basketry and its central role in certain ceremonial cycles. Each mesa, each village carries its own specialties, its own leadership structures, and its own version of a shared Hopi identity. The villages themselves are built for survival as much as for community. Homes made of sandstone blocks and adobe mortar cluster tightly together, sharing walls to conserve heat in the freezing desert nights and shade in the punishing summer sun. Rooftops once served as workspaces, gathering places, and vantage points to watch for approaching visitors across miles of open desert. Living on a mesa top offered natural defense, a crucial advantage in centuries when raids by other groups and later pressure from colonial powers were a real and present danger. But the mesas were never chosen only for defense. They were chosen because from their heights the Hopi could watch the horizon for the clouds that meant life-giving rain, track the position of the sun to know when to plant, and remain close to shrines and springs considered sacred. Geography, spirituality, and survival were never separate considerations for the Hopi. They were, and remain, one and the same. Dry farming in the desert. Perhaps nothing defines Hopi ingenuity more than their agriculture. The Hopi mesas receive on average less than 10 inches of rainfall a year, a fraction of what most farming traditions around the world consider viable. And yet, for over 1,000 years, the Hopi have grown corn, beans, squash, and cotton in this unforgiving land, without irrigation canals, without rivers, and without modern equipment. The technique is known as dry farming, and it is a masterclass in reading the land. Fields are planted not on flat, exposed ground, but in washes and at the base of dunes where blowing sand traps what little moisture exists and when deposited soil settles deep. Corn is planted far deeper than in conventional agriculture, sometimes a foot or more below the surface, so that its roots can reach moisture retained far underground, long after the surface has dried to dust. Hopi corn itself has been selected and adapted over countless generations specifically for this environment. Hopi blue corn, along with other traditional varieties, produces unusually long, vigorous shoots capable of pushing up through deep planting depths, a trait deliberately preserved by farmers who saved seed year after year, favoring plants suited to drought and sand. Fields are spaced widely apart, rows placed unevenly according to subtle variations in the land that an outside observer might never notice. A slight dip that catches runoff, a patch of soil with better structure. This is knowledge held not in textbooks, but in the memory of families who have farmed the same plots, generation after generation. Farming for the Hopi has never been purely practical. It is bound up with prayer, ceremony, and an ethic of humility toward forces far larger than any individual. Corn holds central importance in ceremony and identity. Infants are given an ear of corn shortly after birth, symbolically linking a new life to the plant that has sustained the Hopi people for a millennium. To farm well in Hopi tradition is not simply a technical skill. It is considered a spiritual practice, a way of fulfilling the responsibility taken on at the very beginning, in the emergent story, to care for this land and be cared for by it in return. Clans and society. Hopi society is organized around a system of matrilineal clans, groups of extended family tracing descent through the mother's line. A person is born into their mother's clan, and that clan membership shapes enormous parts of their life. Which ceremonies they may participate in, which roles they may hold, whom they may marry, and which land use rights and responsibilities they inherit. Clan names often reflect elements from nature and the migration stories: Bear Clan, Corn Clan, Snake Clan, Sun Clan, and dozens more, each associated with specific knowledge, ceremonial duties, and historical roles within the village. Traditionally, the Bear Clan has often held a leading position in village leadership in several Hopi communities, though the exact structure of authority varies from village to village, since each of the roughly 12 Hopi villages maintains its own degree of autonomy. Households too follow the maternal line. A married man traditionally moves into his wife's household, and property, including farming rights to specific fields, passes down through women. This gives Hopi women a distinct and significant degree of authority within the domestic and clan sphere, even though many public ceremonial and political roles have historically been held by men. Beyond the clan, Hopi religious and social life is organized through a complex system of ceremonial societies, ritual associations to which individuals are initiated over the course of their lives, each responsible for maintaining specific ceremonies, songs, and sacred knowledge. Together, the clan system and the ceremonial societies form an intricate web of mutual obligation, ensuring that no single family or individual holds total control, and that the responsibility for the community's spiritual and physical well-being is distributed widely across generations. The katsina ceremonies. Central to Hopi spiritual life is the katsina, spiritual beings understood to embody the forces of nature, ancestors, and the essence of everything from rain clouds to animals to stars. Because many katsina ceremonies are considered sacred, and in many cases private to the Hopi themselves, this documentary will describe their broader cultural significance without depicting or detailing specific rituals. Out of respect for practices that are not intended for public reproduction, from roughly the winter solstice through midsummer, katsinam are believed to dwell among the Hopi villages, and elaborately carved and painted katsina figures, sometimes referred to in English as kachina dolls, are traditionally given to children, not as toys but as teaching tools. Representations meant to help young people learn the vast pantheon of katsinam and the values and stories each one represents. These carved figures, made traditionally from cottonwood root, have also become recognized internationally as a significant American Indian art form, with skilled Hopi carvers producing intricate, detailed work that is collected by museums and private collectors around the world. For the Hopi, though, their primary purpose remains educational and spiritual rather than decorative. The katsina ceremonies as a whole reflect the same worldview found throughout Hopi culture, a belief that human beings exist in a reciprocal relationship with the natural and spiritual world, that prayer and right conduct can help maintain balance, and that the well-being of the community depends on the fulfillment of responsibilities passed down since the very beginning of Hopi existence in this world. Language and oral tradition. The Hopi language belongs to the Uto-Aztecan family, a large language group that stretches from the Great Basin of the western United States down through Mexico and includes languages historically spoken by the Aztec, the Shoshone, and the Comanche, among many others. For most of Hopi history, knowledge was transmitted entirely through oral tradition. Migration stories, ceremonial songs, agricultural knowledge, and clan histories passed from elders to children through memorization, repetition, and participation rather than written text. This oral system placed enormous value on memory, on careful listening, and on the responsibility of each generation to carry knowledge forward accurately. Like many indigenous languages in North America, Hopi has faced significant pressure over the past century, particularly as generations of children were sent to government and mission boarding schools, where speaking native languages was often forbidden and punished. As a result, fluency has declined among younger generations, and the Hopi Tribe, along with linguists and educators, has invested significant effort into language documentation, dictionaries, and revitalization programs in tribal schools, aiming to ensure that Hopi remains a living, spoken language rather than one confined to recordings and archives. Language, in Hopi understanding, is not separable from ceremony or worldview. Certain concepts, songs, and prayers do not translate neatly into English, carrying meanings tied specifically to Hopi cosmology. This is one of the central reasons language preservation is considered, by many in the Hopi community, inseparable from the survival of Hopi religion and culture as a whole. Contact, resistance, and the Pueblo Revolt. The Hopis' first sustained contact with European colonizers came in the 1540s, when Spanish expeditions searching for cities of gold reached the Hopi mesas. Spanish missionaries later established churches in several Hopi villages during the early 1600s, seeking to convert the Hopi to Catholicism and, in many documented cases, suppressing traditional ceremonies in the process. This pressure culminated in 1680 when Pueblo peoples across the region, including the Hopi, joined a coordinated uprising known as the Pueblo Revolt, driving Spanish colonial forces out of the region entirely for over a decade. It remains one of the most successful indigenous rebellions against European colonization in North American history. While Spanish forces eventually reconquered much of the wider Pueblo region, the Hopi Mesas remained comparatively isolated, protected in part by their remote high desert location and defensible mesatop villages. Some Hopi villages destroyed their own mission churches during and after the revolt, and Spanish colonial and religious authority was never fully reestablished among the Hopi in the way it was elsewhere in the region. This period left a lasting mark on Hopi identity, reinforcing a strong cultural emphasis on self-determination and wariness toward outside authority, whether religious, governmental, or economic, a theme that continues to echo through Hopi political life today. The split at Oraibi. By the early 20th century, the pressures of American governmental policy, including efforts to allot Hopi land, enforce compulsory schooling, and suppress traditional practices, created deep divisions within Oraibi, the ancient village on Third Mesa. These tensions came to a head in 1906, in what is remembered as the Oraibi split. Villagers divided sharply between those often described as friendlies, more open to accommodation with U.S. government policy, and hostiles, who firmly opposed outside interference in Hopi governance and religious life. According to tradition, the dispute was resolved through a symbolic contest of strength, a pushing match at the village boundary, after which the losing faction departed to establish new villages, including Hotevilla, which remains an important and traditionally minded Hopi community today. The Oraibi split illustrates a recurring pattern in Hopi history. Rather than dissolving under external pressure, Hopi communities have repeatedly reorganized, relocated, or subdivided in order to preserve core traditions and autonomy, even at real social cost. It is a demonstration of resilience through adaptation, a pattern that appears again and again across 1,000 years of Hopi history. Hopi life today. Today, the Hopi tribe is a federally recognized sovereign nation, governed by a tribal council operating under a constitution adopted in 1936. The Hopi Reservation, located in northeastern Arizona, is entirely surrounded by the much larger Navajo Nation, a geographic reality that has shaped decades of political and legal relations between the two tribes. Approximately 12 villages remain active across the Hopi mesas, each retaining a meaningful degree of self-governance. Modern Hopi life blends contemporary work, education, and technology